Hey friends, welcome to Kevin Teaches Music. In today's lesson, we are talking about music theory, in particular, a three-tiered concept that I am going to call the predominant, dominant, tonic system of analysis. Now, I did not come up with this. This is a well-known system of analyzing Western music, but the way that I think about it and the way that I describe it to you is based on things that I've come up with in my private lessons teaching my piano students. Now, what piece was I just playing? Well, it is the fall season, so the tune Autumn Leaves has been going through my head a lot recently. I also just played it in the studio for a project. So Autumn Leaves is a jazz standard, and it's a great tune for any time of year, but in particular, it's been running through my head recently. And I wanted to use that tune to show you this three-tiered concept of predominant, dominant, and tonic. So, first off, I want to just quickly go over what those terms are supposed to mean, and then I'll play little bits of the piece, and I'll try to show you what to listen for and how to identify those three types of sounds. So, I'll start with the third one, which really is the easiest. Tonic. Some of you have probably heard me say that word a million times, or you've learned it in other contexts. It means the home key and the home chord or the home tone. So it can refer to a note. So for example, if you're in the key of B flat major, it can refer to the note B flat. That's the tonic. It can also refer to the tonic chord B flat major. Yum bum bum. And it also can refer to that key in general, as opposed to other keys to which one might modulate. So for example, if the piece was in B flat and then it modulated to G minor, and then somebody says, oh, it's reverting to the tonic, that means it's going back to the tonic key of B flat. Now, all those meanings are really the same thing. It just means the home tone. Now, what does that mean sonically or aurally? What does that mean to our ears? Well, it means that this chord or this tone should sound like the piece has come to rest and that it doesn't need to go any further. Now, I'm not saying that every time you hit the tonic, the piece is over. So I'm not saying it, in fact, does not go any further, but I'm saying it doesn't need to go any further. There are no ends left loose. There are no things left undone. There are no notes left unresolved. It feels complete. So, let's do a couple of basic examples to hear the tonic. Let's do Happy Birthday. How about, let me do it in a reasonable key. Happy birthday. There we go. So I'm going to stop on a chord, and you're going to tell me whether you think it feels like it could be an ending chord. Not whether it's the actual ending of the song, because we all know where that is. The question is, does it feel like a place of completion? All right? It's a little bit subjective, but I think the more you do it, the more you'll sort of get what I'm talking about. So here we go. Happy birth. How about right there? Could you stop there? I know it's very comical to stop in the middle of a word, but ignore the words for a second. Can you imagine that as the end of a piece of music? That chord. Imagine I'm in a concert hall, I'm some great pianist, and that's the end of this concerto, and it ends. I think the audience would look at each other puzzled. I think slowly maybe they would start clapping. I think there would be a lot of confusion because that is clearly not a tonic chord. The inversion's wrong, and the context that's set up by the earlier chord that I played, this one, that sounds like a tonic chord, doesn't it? And so as a result, when I move to the next chord, it feels like it needs to either go back to the first chord or go somewhere else. It just doesn't feel like the ending chord of a song. And when I say inversion, what I mean is the notes I'm playing are G, E, G, C, E. Those are the notes of a C chord. But the lowest note I'm playing, aka the bass note, is a G, which is not a C, obviously. And so that means that the chord I'm playing is in an inversion. Okay, so the bass note is not the main root of the chord. That is one clue that it's probably not the tonic, right? Although it is technically possible to play a tonic chord in an inversion, that's not the main way that we want to learn about tonic chords. We want to practice them first in root position because that's the easiest way. So let's keep going with Happy Birthday. How about right there? Could that be the end? I'd say there's a little more likelihood here. There are a few cases in music history where that type of chord has been used as an ending chord, but in general the answer is no. Especially if you add that extra tone in there, that's the seventh of the chord, that confirms that it's not the end, right? So what about that one? Could be a contender, right? Doesn't sound too bad, does it? Let's try it again. Now imagine that concert hall again, right? Imagine, don't think of the song Happy Birthday, but just listen to this bit of music out of context and imagine, could it be the end of a concerto? I think it can. It feels final, right? It feels like everything has come to rest. Now, of course, we know that the song keeps going, so I'm not asking you whether the song is actually ending there. I'm asking you whether it sounds like it could be a place of rest. The answer is yes. So, what are we practicing? We're practicing our ability to hear tonic chords in a basic 3-tiered system. The other 2 tiers, so we've talked about tonic. The tier that precedes that, or that leads into the tonic, is the dominant. Okay? The dominant, the most famous, what dominant really means is the 5 chord. So tonic is the 1, dominant is the 5. Now, there are other chords that we're going to group in this family, but for now, the most important one is the 5. So, for example, in Happy Birthday, the dominant comes up right there. You'll notice that chord has a very high sense of expectation, of momentum. And that's for 2 reasons. Well, probably more than 2. When I get into it, I'll probably think of more, but right off the bat, I can think of 2. That is because the 5 chord, when we expand it to a 5-7 chord, meaning if we add that extra tone, it is going to be a dominant 7th chord. And in fact, here's a perfect chance to use my handy-dandy little board that I have now. So, for example, let's do it in G major. So the tonic chord is going to be G, B, and D, which we already talked about. The dominant chord is going to be based on the note D, which is the 5th of that scale. It's going to be D, F sharp, A, and then if we use the 7th, which we often do, it's going to have a C. All right. Now, what's the interval between F sharp and C? Well, that's tritone, so that's going to generate a little bit of tension, and that interval wants to be resolved. And it wants to be resolved inwards to G and B. So let me show you how this actually goes. That tritone wants to resolve like this. Right? So you see the C wants to fall down to B. The F sharp wants to resolve upwards to G. The A kind of can go either direction. And then we want to have that G in the bass. Of course, I didn't actually draw in the bass clef, so there you have that. Right? So let's listen to this dominant to tonic progression. All right, you hear the tension? Yeah. It's useful to sing these things too. So sing sol, ti, re, fa. Those are the notes of the dominant chord, right? Sol is the fifth, ti is the seventh of the original scale, right? Not the seventh of this chord. So sol, ti, re, fa. And then mi, do, sol, do. That would be an example of a dominant moving to a tonic. Okay? That type of cadence is a 5-1. It's also called an authentic cadence. It's probably the most important kind of cadence that you'll ever come across. It's ubiquitous in almost all styles of Western music, especially in classical and jazz, and I'd say music theater. It's become less common in popular music nowadays. Popular music has sort of gone in a more modal direction, which is kind of an interesting development. Anyway, then the next level we need to talk about is the predominant, and that is kind of what it sounds like. It's any chord that typically precedes a dominant. So I want to bring up a mental image that I have. I sort of think of a what are those things called? Think of like a pinball machine, right? Well, but imagine it vertically, and all these sounds inevitably filter down to the bottom level. So that bottom level where everything is drawn to by this force of gravity is the tonic, right? So the tonic is the level where all the little balls come to rest, and in order to start their cycle again, they have to be artificially lifted by some sort of mechanism or thing to start their journey again. That's what the tonic feels like. It should feel like you came to rest, and then to start a new cycle, you have to move it up. The dominant is that area right on top of the lowest level where things have gathered a lot of speed. They have a lot of momentum. They have a strong urgency to fall into that lowest level. So I think of this as a gravitational system, right? So the dominant is that area right near the bottom where things are very strongly pulling towards the tonic. Then above that, we have this more nebulous sort of floaty area that's called a predominant. And it does still have some momentum, but it's not quite as strong or fast a momentum as the dominant. Right? So this is sort of, it does have that sense of motion, but it hasn't gathered as much speed. So, what are some examples of predominance? Well, the most famous kind of predominant would be a subdominant. And sub just means under, so it's the tone directly under the dominant. So the dominant was the fifth, the subdominant will be the fourth. So, if we put these in order, it should go predominant, dominant, tonic. That's the order of the progression that I'm trying to describe. And I know this is getting a little confusing, but the subdominant is one type of predominant. So we can try subdominant, dominant, tonic. All right, so for example, here's our key of G. Let's do subdominant, which would be C, and then dominant, which would be D7, and then tonic, G. I'll play that again. So notice that subdominant has a little bit more of a peaceful sound. It almost feels like it could be a tonic, right? It feels like it's like, I don't know, it's like it was in the competition to be the tonic, and it came in second place. It was like it's peaceful, but it just didn't quite make the cut, right? I don't know. I sometimes go crazy with these weird analogies, but so that's the tonic. Now here's the subdominant. It's peaceful, it's mellow, it's nice, but it feels like it needs to go somewhere, right? And there's the dominant, which feels even more strongly like it needs to resolve. And there's the tonic chord, right? I did a little suspension thing there for you. So let's take a look at it on the board here. So if it were a C chord, it would be C, E, and G. So again, we're doing these examples in the key of G. Alright. So there's no one way to do these, right? But you see the first chord, I'll put Roman numerals for you. The first chord there is the 4 chord, capital 4 for major, C, E, G. The second chord there is D7, that's why I put 5, 7. And then the last chord there is the 1. So that is predominant, and in this particular case, it's a subdominant, and then dominant, and then tonic. Okay, now, I don't think we have time in this video for me to go through every possible type of these chords, because there are multiple different kinds of chords within each category, right? But I want to now go to Autumn Leaves, which was the original piece I said we were going to analyze, then we got sort of distracted with Happy Birthday. And I want to see if we can identify these 3 types of chords, okay? Because if you can hear these 3 types, and yeah, the boundaries do blur a little bit. So for example, there are chords that have qualities of a dominant, but also can sort of function in a tonic, especially when you get into more complex music, right? But in the most simple terms, these categories are actually remarkably distinct, sort of surprisingly so. So let's listen to Autumn Leaves, and we're going to try to see if we can identify these 3 categories, all right? So here we go. The key here is this G minor. So it's not the same as the example we did earlier. We were talking about G major earlier. So I don't want you to try to guess what chords I'm playing and then think about it analytically. I just want you to listen and think to yourself, does this feel like home? Does it feel like we're about to get home or need to open the door to walk into the home? Or does it feel like we're kind of away from home? Maybe we're at school, we're off on a trip, and we're kind of getting ready to go home, but it's not as clear yet, right? Again, with the weird analogies, but bear with me. So here's G minor. And here's how the song starts. That's the first chord. Now here's the second chord. I'd like to stop there and analyze those 3. All right, here we go again. Kind of a pleasant chord, right? Kind of a mellow sort of chord. But can you hear it has a little bit of dissonance? Not dissonance in an ugly way, but it has an interval that wants to move, it wants to resolve, doesn't it? What does it want to do? It wants to do that, doesn't it? That's a 7th resolving to a 3rd. C, B flat, F, A, C, B flat, F, A. Notice the bass moves up by a 4th, C, F. The top note moves down by a half step. So, of course, I'm sort of giving it away, right? But you can tell that it needs to go somewhere. So it's not a tonic, we know that. Do you feel how that resolution isn't just random? It has to happen, right? I mean, of course, you can write a song where it doesn't do that. You could go... do some other crazy thing like some Brahms or whatever, Beethoven. And of course, those guys did do crazy stuff, right? But in general, when you hear this, you want it to go there, don't you? Don't you? So, we know that that's not a tonic. It's either a dominant or a predominant. Now, if we listen to the second chord, if that's the tonic, then the first one was the dominant, right? But if the second chord is the dominant, then the first one was probably the predominant. So let's take a listen. First chord. Second chord. Could that be the end of a song? I hope you'll agree with me, no. There's too much tension. It's got that tritone. It's got that minor seventh. It's got all kinds of wacky stuff going on. It cannot be the end. It has momentum. It has things that need to be resolved, right? And that's not that's not a metaphor. I mean, literally, it has notes that need to be resolved. So we have, that means that that's the dominant, and the first chord was a predominant. So this is kind of an interesting progression because a lot of songs start on the tonic, don't they? But Autumn Leaves, jazz, right? Autumn Leaves is going to start on the predominant. So hopefully you can hear the clarity and the sort of homeness of that chord. Now, I will let you guys in on a little secret. This is a little complicated, but that third chord, even though it is a tonic, it is not actually the original tonic of the song. And the reason for that is that this piece is in G minor, and G minor has a relative major, which is B flat major. And oftentimes in jazz and classical pieces, the relative major can sort of function as a second tonic, right? So earlier in this video, I said there was this long laundry list of different types of chords under each category. Well, here's an example. Sometimes a piece can have two focal centers or two tonics. I know it's controversial. It's a very edgy thing to say. But yeah, there are pieces that really truly do have two focal centers. I think of it like an ellipse. If you ever did an ellipse in math class, like a circle has one center and then it has a radius, right? Well, an ellipse has two foci, I suppose that's how you pronounce that. The plural of focus. It has two foci, and there's a certain equation that governs how far the curve is from those two foci. Namely, that any point on the curve, the distance from the one focus to the point and then to the other one, that added together has to stay constant as you move around the ellipse. Again, you're probably wondering, why is this important? Well, it's just an analogy. It's a metaphor to help you understand what's going on. So some pieces do have two tonics. And in this case, even though Autumn Leaves is nominally in G minor, it also has a very strong home of B flat major. And those two keys are identical in terms of their key signature. So they're really the same thing. It's almost like it's like the same house, but one of them's the basement and one of them's the upstairs. Something like that. So we have predominant, dominant, tonic. But what Autumn Leaves does, just like I talked about that dual tonic thing, even though this is a tonic, it introduces a little bit of dissonance into that tonic to give it a little bit of propulsion, right? And that will take us into the next phrase, right? So there's an intermediary chord, which I'm going to just classify as a fluff or a filler chord, maybe sort of in the tonic-y category, or maybe a predominant. It's kind of in that very nebulous upper, if I'm thinking of the gravitational system where things are flowing down towards the tonic, it's very close to the top. But now listen to this second phrase. So now we're in the second line of the song. So what do you think about that? It's got some tension, right? It's kind of jazzy. It's got a little bit of angst, right? Why does it have that angst? Because it's got that tritone in it. But it's not quite as angsty as this, right? It's a little more mellow, isn't it? For those of you who are curious, this type of chord is a half diminished chord, right? So the really angsty one is the fully diminished chord, which is all tritones and all minor thirds. But this one's got that kind of sweeter, mellower sort of, I think of it as very French. It feels very French to me for some reason. Whereas this one feels more German, right? This one's more floaty and sort of gray and Debussy, right? But it is floaty, but nonetheless it has some momentum, right? It does want to go somewhere. Namely, there, right? So let's apply our analysis again. So we have, obviously not a tonic, I hope you all can agree. Let's do the test. If it's a dominant, then the next chord should be the tonic. If it's the predominant, the next chord should sound like the dominant. So here we go. Now, I was doing this with a student recently, and she said, "Oh, that's the tonic." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, it just sounded so nice. It sounded so good. It sounded so correct." And I said, "Yeah, well-written songs, the chord progression is always going to sound cool. Like, the next chord is going to sound correct if the song's well-written. But you have to listen for, does this sound like the end of the phrase?" And I hope you can agree that's not the end of the phrase. I can't just leave it there. I have to go. Now I can end the phrase and potentially go for a coffee break, right? So again, what we're discovering is the same exact structure. We have predominant, dominant, tonic. And this time, we've actually landed on the nominal tonic of G minor. Now, for those of you who are curious, I will just quickly go ahead and show you what the actual chords of this opening section of Autumn Leaves are, in case you want to actually, learn a little bit more and play them on the piano. So, the autumn leaves, that first chord. So, the piece is in two flats. So that's either B flat major or G minor, as we discussed earlier. Two possible tonal centers. So that first one, the autumn leaves, that goes up to the Fa, which is the E flat. And the chord is going to be C minor. So I'm going to write the melody note up here and then put the chord here. And then the next chord is going to be F7, which is F dominant 7. So that is going to be the dominant chord of B flat, right? Drift by my window. And then, so thus far we have C minor 7, which is our predominant, and then we have F7, which is our dominant. Now, a dominant chord should be a 5 of something, right? That's the definition of what a dominant chord is. So if F7 is the 5, then what's the 1? Let's see. F, E flat, B, D, C, B flat, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Should lead to B flat major, and in fact, that's exactly what it does. All right. So that's the first phrase. It's C minor, 7, F7, B flat. Now, let's assign Roman numerals to that. So we have the tonic, which is the B flat, is the 1. The dominant, which is the F7, is the 5-7. By the way, that when I say 5-7, the first number refers to the root of the chord. So in reference to the original key center. So 5 means of this scale of B flat, we go to the 5th of that scale and build the chord off of that. And then the 7 means we're adding a 7th of that chord. So you build the F chord, F, A, C, and then you add the 7th of F, which would be E flat. So when I say 5-7, it doesn't mean like, oh, combine a 5 and a 7 or something like that. It's a 5 chord that has its own 7th. All right. And then a little less common chord, unless you're a jazzer, would be that first one, that C minor. That's a 2 chord, right? A very common jazz chord, not super common in other genres. So that's going to be a minor chord. So I'll put a lowercase I with a 7, right? And in our grand scheme of things, that's predominant, dominant, tonic. Okay? And then the next section is going to be the exact same type of progression, but leading to G minor instead of B flat. So again, we talked about the two potential tonal centers here. So let's do it backwards. The ending would be G minor, right? That would be our final tonic. Okay, so I'll make that a little I because it's minor, but it'll be an I because it's a tonic. And then our dominant, if G minor is our tonic, what's our dominant? G, A, B flat, C, D, it'll be D. All right? Tricky thing here. To create a dominant chord of a minor tonic, we need to go out of the key signature. Why? Because every dominant chord has to have a major triad. Okay? This is the last important point, then I'll let you go. If you're in the key of G minor and you go and play a 5 chord, let's see what happens. Okay, so we start on D. That's the root of our 5 chord. If I use the notes from the key signature, aka 2 flats, I'm going to get D, F, and A. That is a minor chord. Now listen to what happens if I play that chord and then go to my tonic. It still sounds cool, don't get me wrong. It sounds awesome. But it does not have the need for resolution that this does. So here's the two examples. The first is the pure minor 5 chord from the key signature. It's a little more plaintive, right? It's a little more, I don't know, can't think of the word, but somber, right? But then that has the tension that needs to resolve here. That tension is generated by, instead of using D, F, A, which is a minor 5, we change the F to F sharp, which is not in the key signature of G minor, but it is the raised 7th of that key. And that is also called a leading tone. Why? Because it leads via half step into the tonic G. So instead of having F natural to G, we have F sharp to G. That is a very important thing to remember. That's the definition of a dominant chord. It has to have that leading tone. The leading tone is the 7th of the tonic scale, but it has to be a major 7th, aka a half step below the tonic. It can't be a minor 7th, aka a whole step below the tonic. That leading tone, which again is the raised 7th of the tonic scale, is also the 3rd of the dominant chord, but it's a major 3rd, not a minor 3rd. So I know there's a lot of terminology here, but go to a piano and try it out and you'll see exactly what I mean. If you're in G minor and you just play a D minor chord, you're going to get an F natural leading to the G. That is a perfectly nice cadence, but it's not what we're doing right now. What we need is the F sharp, which makes the D chord major, and therefore a dominant chord leading to G minor. So all of that is to say that our chord here should be a D7, and D7 means D dominant 7, which includes that F sharp. And then our predominant is actually a very fancy one that is called a half diminished chord, like I talked about earlier, and that is indicated by the little circle with a slash there. And that's going to be A half diminished 7. All right. So here is our completed project. That is the first 2 phrases of Autumn Leaves. Now there are some measures missing, so it actually there's a fourth measure of each phrase, so it's 1, 2, 3, and then a filler measure, and then 1, 2, 3, and then a filler measure. But these are the important measures that illustrate the concept that I've been trying to teach, which is predominant, dominant, and tonic. All right, thanks for bearing with me, and I hope that you learned something. So the most important one to practice on the piano, you can practice the ones from Autumn Leaves. Those are great. You can also practice playing 4-5-1. So these are 2-5-1s, okay? 2-5-1s are more popular in jazz. You can also practice 4-5-1s. They're going to sound very similar. But practicing those, so for example, in the key of C, F, G, C, practicing those and getting an ear for those is going to really help with your ear training across so many different styles of music, being able to learn songs by ear, and even just being able to appreciate more pieces of music, from a composer's standpoint. Okay, let me know what you think in the comments, and happy practicing, and I'll see you next time.